Um, so welcome for the second Saturday in a row to the show Black Matter. The Art Center is excited to be able to present this exhibit, which was curated by Tammy Jo Wilson. We asked her to do that. She briefly waved at you. And today, we're not strictly going to be talking about art for art's sake. We're not going to talk about art for art's sake actually at all, but we're going to talk about what it means to be an artist of color. And Tammy will be moderating this talk, and three of the artists in the exhibit, mostly Wada, Jeremy Okai Davis and Jamila Clark are going to be a part of the speakers panel. And Christine Miller and Maya Vivas will be present here with their work. So you can come into the exhibit Wednesdays through Saturdays from noon to 5 p.m. And our last day will be June 19th, when we will have a reception, a closing reception from 3 to 5. Is that correct, Tammy?
Yes.
And after that, the show is going to go disappear. So this is the time frame that you have to come and look at the exhibit. By June 19th, everybody can walk around like we didn't know there was a pandemic. Anyway, Tammy, I'm leaving it in your hands to take away this talk about what it means to be an artist of color.
Esther, I'm going to break in really briefly here. Sorry, Tammy Jo. I wanted to thank our co-sponsors for the show.
Thank you.
The Oregon Cultural Trust and the NAACP local chapter, Corvallis Albany branch. And we did have a couple of individual sponsor families as well, Tom and Kelly Steele and Sharon Rackham King. So we are very pleased to receive that kind of support for a show that is sharing.
Thank you, Sharon.
Sharing these voices. So thank you.
The other ones too. But
and take it away.
All right, well, thank you everybody for being here. I'm really excited to have this conversation with everybody and with the artists here. I just want to take a moment to also say, make sure to come and see the exhibit. We do have a unique piece, one-time only chance to see it, Mosley's piece on the back wall, the giant mural installation. So it's very special, and it will be your only chance to see it, along with just experiencing all these artists work together in the space. It's definitely worth the trip from wherever you are. So first, I just want to start it again about pointing out our artists for the day, just so everybody gets a chance to see who they are and find their faces on the Zoom grid. So let's start out with saying hi to Jeremy. Jeremy, can you just say hi and maybe say a little something?
Hey everybody, thanks for taking this time out on Saturday to listen to us chit chat about art and being a Black artist.
Can you describe which work in the show is yours, just so everybody knows?
I did, my work is mostly portrait based. So I guess if you look at Hester's tab there, you can see it's that corner, I guess it's the front corner of the gallery. There's a few pieces that reference my family. One with my dad holding my big brother when he was a baby, one with my mom, sister, and brother. Those are older pieces that I did for a show called In Education in 2017. And then the two that kind of are on the wall by themselves, right when you walk into the, I guess to your left, are the newer works in the show. Again, portrait based. And I guess we can talk about more what the paintings actually are and my reasoning for doing them, because I think it kind of speaks to one of your questions that you had today. So, but yeah, most of the portrait-based paintings are mine. If you come into the gallery, you'll see those.
Cool. Thank you.
Mhm.
Jamila, can you go next and just introduce yourself and describe your work in the show?
Hi. Sorry. Hi, thanks for joining us this Saturday. I'm Jamila. I'm a photography, I do a lot of photography work. My work is focused more on a narrative, a fictionalized narrative with sort of a cinematic feel. Most of the ones I have submitted this time are more introspective, kind of focused around feminine presenting characters, either dealing with loss or the idea of giving oneself up. So just kind of like a little interior look at these characters' personal lives.
Cool. Thank you, Jamila. And Mo, do you want to go next?
Hey, I'm mostly water, which is difficult for folks to say, spell, and remember. So I just reduce it to Mowo. I've got the least technical work in the entire show. Up on the back wall over there. And I think a lot of that work that I'm doing is drawing directly from a pre-formal and subconscious space. So it's I try to sort of get the honesty of the thing before I can analyze it too much, and then in a sense let the chips fall where they may, to try to come forth with as much truth as whatever that means as I can in the moment, particularly with that mural piece that was done just in a few hours or whatever. So yep, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I like your word honesty as a descriptor for your work. That's a good one. Thank you. All right. Well, just briefly, I believe they're not here, but let me check the screen for a second. Yeah, I don't see Maya or Christy here. I wasn't expecting Christy or Maya, but Maya Vivas did the ceramic pieces. They're black stoneware. Each piece is a representation of an internal organ. And then Christy Miller did the piece Intentional Definitions of Black, and a piece called Solar Power, which is the color felt ones with a story narrative on there. So make sure to check those out when you go and visit. Although they're not with us today, I do want to give them their props and mention for this conversation. All right, well, let's get into the topic for the day. So this conversation, separate from the artist talk, which we did have last week. And Hester, is that artist talk going to be available for people to view?
It is available for as far as I know. Cynthia, it's on our website and on our YouTube channel.
Cool. So if you want to go back to that and listen to the artist talk in more detail about their process and their work from that side of things, you can find it there. All right, so I'm just going to kind of dive into it and start with the first question and let the artist think about it, ponder it, and then see where we go. So my first question, my jumping off question is going to be, do you feel you have an obligation as a Black artist to create work that speaks about your personal experience of being Black, or to generalize and represent Black people through your work? Whichever artist wants to go first or has thoughts or ideas, just raise your hand.
I'll go. I personally don't necessarily feel an obligation so much as kind of a responsibility to speak for Black artists, but not even in a every time I step out into the world as an artist way. Just in my studio, I sometimes feel like like if I didn't, who would? Not to say there's not other artists that aren't doing it, but I think that's where the responsibility comes. Like just in my own personal practice and walk in life, like I would feel like I was doing myself a disservice if I didn't take as much time as I could as a Black artist to speak for other Black artists or speak for myself as a Black man in the world. I feel like it would and that's not to say that other artists have to, you know what I mean? Like I don't think an artist has to do that. Me personally, I feel like I would do myself a disservice if I didn't. That's kind of where I come from with it.
Too, I think there's an interesting distinction between the idea of obligation and responsibility, and the different definitions of what those two words are and how we feel them as artists when we're thinking about our creative process. Whereas obligation feels a little bit heavier and responsibility feels like something that you're giving, which I think is an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really like that too. Oh, go for it. Go for it.
Oh, okay. Just jumping off of that, like, I feel like one of the things I really like about art is it's a really good way to express feelings that you have, things you're dealing with. So I know for me, it's an outlet. Like, some of this work doesn't just come because it was like, oh, I have to make this for a show. It would just be like, I have these feelings and I need to express them somehow. And so I don't think it's a obligation as much as it's something that I definitely feel like I need to do just as an artist in general. But I feel the responsibility comes in choosing to use myself, choosing to seek out models of color when I shoot photography, because when I first got started, so many of the people I either looked at or looked up to or in my own community was so heavily white. That's just how it was. Even if they were a Black artist, they felt obligated to shoot with white models because otherwise they wouldn't get seen. No one would want to buy that work. And even I had a moment like, would it be better work if somebody saw it with a white model? And I was like, no, because some of it's about my emotions, my issues. I can't use a white model for that, or it just wouldn't seem the same. And part of it was also that, and looking at it like a director's lens, because like filmmaking is something in the back of my mind all the time when I do this. I'm the director. I get to pick who gets to be seen. So why should I have to cast somebody I don't want to cast? If people aren't going to like it, fine. They're losing out. But I want to make sure that someone can go to the gallery who looks like me and is going to be like, hey, there I am. There I am in a setting that I normally don't get to see myself in. So I might not be able to make films like I wanted to as a younger person that are fantastical and whatever, but I can still make artwork that shows Black people in spaces being magical. And that, I feel, is one of the responsibilities I always think about whenever I'm creating, is that who is going to see this, and shouldn't they get to see that they can be a part of an art world or a part of a fantasy world, any of that stuff.
Yeah.
I what I'm resonating with, and I'm not suggesting that you're saying this, Jamila, but what is resonating for me off of what you're saying is there's a question about sort of self-worth and what I'm allowed to bring to the work, versus what is coming up and what I'm compelled to, and the amount of sort of self-censorship that is also attached to a kind of self-loathing and things like that. And then there's another component for me, as I've been told my entire life, or for much of my life, the majority of my life, that I'm in some sort of gray area. And so and growing up in Central Oregon since '92 till now, anytime I get the relief of being seen as and included in the Black experience, it's a tremendous, there's a tremendous feeling of community. So I think there's also a desire for, like, for example, Muka, raise your hand for a second. See that lady, Virginia Graham? So that's my grandmother right there. So I've always come from a mixed background. I think we all have. I think we oftentimes miss the diversity that's in the room, even if we are in a room full of, if you identify as white and you see there's a room full of people who also identify as white in the room, there's always quite a bit of diversity there. And that is actually what I've been most interested in, is the diversity and things like that. But I don't know if it's a choice that we can make personally as artists. I don't know if there'll ever be a time when the Black or some sort of other or some sort of subset label isn't attached to us from the outside in. And I do think also too, I would still be doing this work. I'm more interested in where there's the gaps of understanding and where we can talk about the awkward stuff or the difficult stuff. So I don't know if it's totally true. How could I know? But I'd like to think I would be doing similar work to sort of announce what is often these sort of dry spots of ignorance that we can kind of water with a little bit of insight or whatever, regardless of it being Black, whatever. I mean, I think there's a message underneath that is really important to convey. And right now we're seeing so often that there are the Black voices, trans voices, the others, the peripheral folks, the whatever, these are becoming the voices that we have to listen to right now, because if you can allow yourself the benefit of the doubt, they have, whether or not they're an artist or not, just their life experience is telling you what is not going to work out for anybody, you know? So like, I think this is a big part of it too, so.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, I like that dry spots of ignorance. I like that that phrasing, because a lot of times with the work that I'm making currently, probably in the last like 5 years, I've thought about like my own personal dry spots of ignorance, of like African American ignorance and history that I didn't learn. I didn't get a chance to learn when I was a kid, or didn't have the desire really at that point to learn, or the opportunity. So like my work now is me kind of making up for that, course correcting this dry spot of ignorance that I had growing up, and hopefully in turn kind of fill in the gaps for other people that have that same kind of lack of education when it comes to African American history, or people that didn't get shine in their day. So a lot of like the painting this in the show, the two is a guy named Junius Kellogg that I had no idea about. I watched a documentary about a year ago, and he was a basketball player in the 50s, played for Manhattan College, and there was the like the point shaving scandal that happened back then, and he was approached by one of the people that were trying to get the kids to point shave, and he actually didn't do it and told on them, and became like this kind of figurehead for earnesty and honesty in sport back in the 50s that I had no idea about. And I'm a basketball player, like I played growing up, and I didn't know who he was. And there's more to his life that's really interesting. He ended up playing for the Harlem Globetrotters. And when they were in the South, got into a car accident. They were just driving around Alabama and got into a car accident, and he was paralyzed from the neck down, so couldn't play basketball any longer, and was just thought that his life was over. But he was approached by another fellow, I can't remember his name, but he ended up being a basketball coach for wheelchair basketball in the 60s, and took the wheelchair basketball team that he had to the championship, and ended up kind of revitalizing or bringing light to wheelchair basketball. So he's just this African-American man that I had no idea about, and I assume a lot of people don't have ideas about. So my paintings now are a way to shine a light on these people, Black people that didn't get a light shown on them when they should have, or so basically course correcting myself and history is what I'm looking to do with my work. So that's my kind of responsibility that I talk about as an artist and as a person of color, to like prop my people up a little bit more.
Yeah. Hester, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm putting it in the whatchamacallit, the chat.
chat.
I didn't really want to interrupt. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I was just thinking about it as all of you were talking about how there's things that we just didn't know through our educational system or our upbringing, and then things that we just didn't even know. Sometimes you don't know how much you don't know, but I feel like there's also things that we were taught and pushed on us that we have to like unlearn. And I'm wondering if there's things as an artist or just as a human being, in order to, move forward with our art practices, that you've had to unlearn in order to move forward and feel successful and productive in your art practice.
I don't think I've had to unlearn anything. I think everything that I've learned has been beneficial or useful, whether or not I use it or not. I don't want to filter out anything, because I think it's all usable information, even if it's negative information. I think you can apply it to your work and apply it to your practice in a way that kind of flips it and makes it a little bit more valid and positive in a way.
Yeah, there's this book, Silencing the Past, which one of the things I took away from it was getting the various narratives, the ones that censor out certain, like I grew up learning about Lewis and Clark. I never learned about York, but the fact that I grew up learning about that without that information is just as important to getting to what is actually going on. So I definitely hear that. It's not about necessarily being prohibitive or that one teaching isn't of value, but you start to learn that the stuff that was excluded and the stuff that was included intentionally is a valuable insight to what you might better understand was the real history of things, or where we actually might get going. So I definitely hear that, Jeremy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the gray area.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it's really important. Like there's actually a series that I've been planning that ties on that, you know, like you see, like with art history, you see all these like amazing paintings. You're like, oh my God, look at this art history. And then you might see something later. I'm a history buff, so I watch a lot of shows where they'll talk about it or they'll be restoring something. And then you find out that that painting actually was in a larger frame. And then there was another character there. And it turns out it was like, oh, it was the half Black daughter of this guy. And they just kind of tuck them out, and you're like, so now you've added to it. So it's like, it hasn't taken away, it hasn't said that that doesn't exist. It's just, it's added to a story that's already there. And so I think that's kind of the nice thing about learning, is that like you can keep adding and it doesn't negate everything that you learn, but it does give it a more wider view, a bigger image. So
Yeah, for sure. So I think I'm going to jump into one of the next questions that I would like to bring up. When you're taking on a new work or a series, how do you decide if your idea is worth investing your time and energy into?
Me personally, I keep a sketchbook. So like my sketchbook is kind of my filtering device. Like if I'm drawing something or working on a body of work, if I lose interest during the sketching process or the research process, that lets me know that I probably shouldn't move any further with anything large, you know. Or I might do like one painting and see how I respond to it. And if it doesn't like resonate weeks later or a month later, I probably just sit on it at that point. That's how I usually kind of filter out what's worth pursuing and what's not. And also just how much it sparks interest in me while I'm working or while I'm researching it. If I want to keep coming back to it, that lets me know that I should probably pursue it a little bit further, and that if I'm interested, there's probably somebody else out there that's interested in it. So.
Would you ask the question one more time?
Absolutely.
I'll probably ask you that multiple times.
When you're taking on a new work or a series, how do you decide if the idea is worth investing your time and energy into?
That is, again, like a self-worth kind of question as I'm responding to it. I have to trust at this point that my view and my voice is valid, that I am seeing what I'm seeing, and that it is important to articulate it for myself to better understand it. And also because the reality is, time and time again, there are other people who are resonating with it, whether or not they're out trying to explain it. There are other folks who are saying, oh, this was my experience as well. And there's been too many times where, you know, maybe years, maybe even decades later, what you had, I mean, this happens all the time. It could be an invention, it could be an insight, whatever, where you say, I saw that thing 10 years ago. And I'm sort of not willing to risk that any longer, because we are so desperately in need of healthy communities in which we can talk about this, you know, and uprises, things like, you know, affinity groups or whatever. But that's something that I'm really trusting. Which is what's difficult about it, perhaps, as the artist, is that you're often on that kind of on a lonely vanguard, and it may take folks a minute to catch up to what you're talking about or see it. You know, if I oftentimes repeat myself thinking about this as a continuum, and that the majority group is sort of bunched up in one area on that continuum, and if you get far enough ahead on something, you can end up looking like you're behind the group. You know, and so. But this is a risk that you have to take, and you have to trust. You don't have to, but there's a very painful experience when you don't lean into that voice that's coming through you, only to find out that, you know, however much time passes, years later or whatever, it was what was actually needed. And I think about like Bayard Rustin's, and I think about, you know, maybe more popular James Baldwin's or whatever, like folks who were trying to navigate the multitude of things, who were saying things that weren't necessarily always that popular who are being excluded from the group, but then down the line later on we see some of what their messaging is and how it holds up over time. So again, there's that truth thing, there's that sort of truth and honesty thing as well.
So yeah, I think with that question too, I think about, I've heard a lot of artists talking about all of the heavy things that have been happening in the last year, and then feeling like sometimes the conversations in their work don't necessarily fit with that feeling, and it can be a bit of a challenge when there's so many intense things happening. It's like, is what I'm doing, you know, holding up and important in this moment? And I know that that can be a challenge right now, but sometimes just in life in general, you know. So that's definitely something I feel artists talking about a lot.
Yeah, I think that goes back to that obligation idea, like the feeling that we're obligated as Black artists to speak to what's happening today. I think that's where the pressure comes from, and it can be put on by yourself or by just your community. Just watching the news every day, seeing things happen, makes you feel like you're supposed to respond in a certain way. And again, I don't think you're supposed to. I think it's important too, but not necessarily necessary, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I struggled with it a little bit last year after George Floyd, and when I was in the studio working, feeling like I needed to make paintings that spoke to it, because I saw you see his portrait all over the place on buildings and on Instagram, people posting his face, and you feel like I'm supposed to do something with this. But I had to keep coming back to the idea that just as a Black artist, as a Black man, making art, being in the community, doing positive things is enough. Like what you're doing is enough. You don't have to necessarily, you don't have to necessarily like be on the soapbox all the time. You can just be in your studio making work, posting a painting of whoever on Instagram, and just having your face attached to that is enough for the community to know that positive things are happening.
Yeah, I stutter stepped around that, where I didn't want to become an agent of exploitation of the things I wanted to speak on, you know. Oh yeah, Jamila, you're muted.
No, I'm just agreeing with you. Like it's so complicated, because it's like there becomes this obsession, especially with everything going on focusing on the trauma and not necessarily everything else. And then it's just, as somebody seeing it, as somebody who it affects, it definitely is hard to like see that's all you're seeing. Like you want some positive. You don't want to just watch horrible things happen and talk about just the horrible things happen. You want that same momentum when positive things are happening. And I think that's the problem. It's like, do I get involved in this and then I'm just adding to more stress and suffering, or do I add something that is showing a positive side, like brought to momentum because this thing happened? So it's like trying to find that balance is really hard, I think.
Yeah, and then are you somehow betraying what's actually happening because you want to bring the full spectrum of emotions? Yeah, I hear that. Well, it's interesting in Bend here because, again, majority of the folks in this town identify as white, and are out doing that, you know, in protests, several protests, but, you know, of course, with the death and murder of George Floyd. But I wanted folks to internalize these revolutionary acts much more. And I wanted them to look at the traumas that are in, like, one thing that's advertised very well is whether or not it's accurately portrayed, but one thing that's advertised very well is Black trauma in Black communities. I really wanted our community of majority white folks to look at the traumas within their communities to see the connection between the two and not put it out into this other realm that if only we can fix what's wrong with the Black communities, then everything will be good. I'm thinking, no, much more personally, you have to look at your own traumatic experiences here, and in very subtle ways they oftentimes occur. Identifying as white, for example, I would say is a trauma in and of itself, because it does not accurately speak to your heritage or your lineage. It is deeply betraying where you came from and what your roots are. And you may find along that journey that, oh, you didn't know, but you're Black, like you may, so those things seem to be deeply important. I get really nervous about how we often rush to get on the right side of history and don't personally investigate how it's showing up in our lives.
I think so. With that, I'm gonna move to one of my next questions. I'd like to talk about the importance of being seen as a Black artist, not just as like a name on the wall label that could often be defaulted to the assumption of white. And to me, this speaks to part of the importance of having the show. We have a lot of exhibits now that are like, oh, it's showing diversity, but then I come to the exhibit and I'm not seeing, I feel like I can't see the artists. And do you know what I'm getting at here?
I talk fast. What does most deaf say? They all talk fast, but they all think slow. I I talk quick sometimes, but I need to hear that. Would you give me the layman's version of that? Would you give me the kindergarten version of that so I could work my way up?
Sure. I'll just yeah. So I'm just gonna kind of free think what I'm thinking about, what I'm trying to get at. I'm thinking about like my life experience. I grew up in Wisconsin. Both my parents were white, all very white community. I had little or no opportunity to see artists that looked like me. And if there were artists there in the museum or the gallery that looked like me, I had no way of knowing that. I saw their name on the museum label, but I had no, there was no indication of that. And so, and I see that continuing to happen. So like I went to a show that I'm not gonna call out the show specifically and put them on the spot, but I went to a show recently in Eugene that was all about diversity in the arts and how to, an artist representing from this group and from that group. But I had no indication of like, is there a Black artist in this room? I have no idea. And in an interest for me to try and connect with my community and see their work out there and see what they're interested in doing and trying to connect with them on a personal level of, I'm an Oregon artist, I want to see the artists in my community. But if I don't see them, if I can't see them or identify them, how can I make those connections? And is that important? What is the importance of that? What happens when we don't have that? Yeah.
Did you end up finding out who it was? Were they?
I made an educated guess.
Okay.
Yes.
Was there an opening for the show, or was it, this is during
That was during COVID, so it was make an appointment, go in. There was only like 2 or 3 people allowed in the gallery at one time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was like 5 artists. There was anyway.
I mean, I wonder,
the Hispanic artist, the whatever artist, and yeah.
I mean, I wonder if that's the gallery's responsibility to have some sort of didactic information with the like paperwork that they hand to you to show like maybe an image of the person with their name that you walk around the gallery with. Yeah, I don't know, like I don't think on the wall there should be their name and then like in parentheses Black artists.
Yeah,
I think
yes, I agree.
I think that'd be really odd. I think in like pandemic times, like it was really difficult. Like normally you would have the opening and theoretically all the artists would be there and they would be there and you would see like introduce the people like, my name is Jeremy Okai Davis, I'm a Black artist. Like I wouldn't have to say that, you would just know. I think the pandemic kind of made it a little bit more difficult to just to show your face, obviously with the work. But going back, I think the gallery has a responsibility to make it very clear who's who and what they're showing and who they're showing. Or do they? I don't know.
Curation is a huge thing. I also think this is the beauty of some of the paradox that we have to deal with, where it's like yes, please announce that there's Black artists, but also don't just see us as Black artists,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think that that's really, now we're talking about the United States in a way where or it exists all around the globe, but where we're really dealing with that paradox of, it needs to be understood that this particular person who has either self-identified or been told that they are under this label is seen from this particular perspective because of that label. And also too, that doesn't contain all of who they are. But that's a really tricky spot. But this is the gift of the art of curation. If you can get somebody to do that really well, to be able to announce those things, I think folks also must run the same risk that the artist does of maybe not saying it the best way, but the attempt, you know, and maybe speaking to that, like, this is an attempt to try to speak to in the curation, because if it's, you know, and then who's saying it? It's a huge difference at this time in our history if Hester is saying that versus you saying that, right? So there's those things as well. And then the other thing that makes me think of is, I like roll my eyes so often at the landscape paintings. My goodness, the landscape painting, another landscape painting. However, if it's an indigenous artist, as much as that word is becoming homogenized, what have you, I feel completely different. If I'm seeing the birds and if I'm seeing the mountains, and I know that this is an indigenous artist, somebody who is a Paiute artist, for example, which would be germane to my area, then that's on point, and I want to know that, and I do want to know that thing, and I also want to know if that's part of their process as the artist, that they want you to know what their identity is as well. So those are some of my thinkings there.
Yeah, I think it's really tricky because you don't want to feel like you're the diversity selection. You don't want that. That's kind of weird. And you don't want people to be like, oh, I only love it because a Black person made it or because this person made it. Like, that's also kind of weird. But I also think it does impact like how you're looking at stuff. Like, as someone who goes to a lot of photography galleries, like, and some of it's documentary and it's not necessarily by the artist of the artist, it's of someone who might be an outsider looking into a community. And so that does change how you're seeing it. Like, is it from an outsider's lens or is it somebody who represents me? And sometimes I really wouldn't know until I was at the opening and I saw the artist or I read the statement. And I mean, like, that's where statements can kind of help a little bit, especially if the person chooses to disclose who they are. If they don't, it doesn't really help a ton. But I do think it's a really fine line. I think galleries have to kind of decide how they want to deal with it and how they're going to make sure that it doesn't exclude the person from being included, because that's the first problem. Like, do you disclose you're a Black artist when you submit, thinking that they'll either pick you just because you happen to be Black, or they might not pick you because you're Black and that doesn't fit their style or their vibe. Like, you could be that landscape painter and they're like, oh, but they didn't go to like Juilliard or whatever. Like, they didn't have that background or their name is weird. So no one will know how to say it. We can't like have them do a gallery show. I don't want to have to try to figure out how to say this indigenous name. Like, you don't want that either. So it's like, you have to, I think it's definitely both things working together, and like Jeremy's saying, like, sharing the risk, I think, and some of the responsibility. So it's not just on the artist and it's not just on the gallery to like guess, because they don't know, they're not the artist, but it's definitely tricky.
Yes.
Well, and I think that's how you know you're in the right zone. Like, if it's tricky, now we have something to work with. You know, now we're really talking. But if we're just like, I don't know, if it's all good. Like, if we don't look at like, I'm very thankful. My goodness, this is a weird, and this is a thing to say that isn't. How do I deal with? Let me ask as a question. How do I deal with the fact that during a pandemic, because of, very specifically, not just for example, but because of George Floyd's murder, I am being asked to work more as an artist? How do I reconcile that catalyst? Like, yeah, I want the work, absolutely. Like, my goodness, but my mute button's not on, but I'm being quiet.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's a question that just has to sit there. It just has to be out there, and we need to think about it. I don't think we need to answer it. I think we need to think about it. Anyway, I'm going to give us a second to think about it, and I'm going to look at my questions. Feel free, artists, to jump in. All right, so here's one. Before we get finished, I do want to make sure to ask this question because it's one of my favorite things when I think about the art world and the future of art and just in general. For me, being an art patron as well as an artist and curating and doing my nonprofit work, purchasing artwork by my fellow artists, I feel is really important. It'd be like being, a baker not buying bread. Like we need to be participants in our own art ecology and support ourselves and each other. So my question is, what ideas do you have for encouraging the Black community to become active buyers of financially accessible art by local artists? I can read that again if anyone likes. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to read it again. What ideas do you have for encouraging the Black community to become active buyers of financially accessible artwork by local Black artists?
I don't know.
That's a fair answer. I don't know if I have the answer either.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Like I wish there was an easy way to get people. I mean, I buy art, but it's all rooted in like not decoration in a way, but like I have a house and I want art on the wall, so I have that. That's where I come from. That's the angle I come from. Not everybody. I don't know. It's that's hard. I really don't know how to encourage it. And I'm going to stop right there. I just don't know.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. I think for me, when I purchase artwork, I do it intentionally as a gesture to the artist to show that I see them, I hear them, and I want to support them as an artist. Whether it be a tiny little painting that I can afford on that day, or a piece that like visually is really intriguing and speaks to me in my experience. And so I think that's one of the reasons I always encourage art patronage by artists within our community, because I feel like the way art patronage has been historically is really, it's not working, and it's not gonna, it needs to be broader. I mean, obviously I think there will always be a sector where art is monetized as an investment, as an object of expense and kind of elite status. That's just, it's gonna be there. But I think there's more to art than that, and there's more to our community than that. And I think we've gotten really good at understanding the importance of buying local and supporting our local economies and our local communities, thinking about buying food local, thinking about where our furniture and our other arts and crafts are made. But I think when it comes to more fine art, we're not thinking about that quite as enough. And I think in this conversation and thinking about Black artists, and I think too often, not too often is not the right word. I think right now I'm seeing a lot of art collectors wanting to add artists of color to their work, like they're feeling the moment and they're feeling a responsibility and opportunity and need to purchase work from underrepresented communities, and that's great, and I appreciate that. But I think we also need to be thinking about purchasing, supporting work in our own communities as well. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that topic.
Yeah, kind of.
I don't know how to make it happen.
It reminds me a little bit of like folks buying up like cryptocurrency, like, oh, is that what we're doing now? Like this is the new sound investment or whatever. But with the same sort of maybe terminology that comes from that, maybe what you're speaking to a little bit in terms of buying local artists or art locally is like decentralizing talent. Like it doesn't have to live in one qualified hub or whatever, and that looking at the functionality of purchasing it because of what it means to you as it's in your home and you get to visit it and other people get to visit and have a dialogue with it. But then also for most artists, if you're able to purchase some of their work, you'll be able to see if you wanted to check up on that artist, but you'll be able to see immediately how that impacts their lives through that purchase, a print or whatever it is. You know, I mean, this is something actually with the prints is like artists need help oftentimes making art available that isn't just the original, you know, that's actually a thing, so that, you know, I can buy a print for $20 or whatever. So it's more accessible to art, is more accessible to more folks outside of the $1,000, $1 million range or what have you.
Yes.
So I jumped around, but yeah, there's definitely a direct and immediate impact. Usually if you sell a painting, I'm going to be able to pay a bill. You know, I've seen that in galleries too, like, and I maybe have used that even, but like the price tag is like my phone bill, you know, like that's what it is. And there's something really satisfying about that. There's an immediate, even though it's totally transactional, there's an immediate impact on that person and the assumed improvement of that person's life, you know, through purchasing something that they created from nothing, you know, like that's also really miraculous too, that they just conceived this thing up and then made it tangible.
Absolutely. So I would love to, we're getting up into our last 10, 15 minutes here or so. I would like, if there is anybody, any participants out there that have questions, comments, things that they would like to add for the conversation. I'm going to try and expand my screen so I can see as many of you as possible. Raise your hand. Oh, I see a hand. Okay, go for it. Is that Virginia? Virginia, can you unmute yourself? Oh, we still can't hear you.
She's saying nah. I'm vibing off you, because she's letting it go.
Okay.
She'll write me a letter. I'll send it back to you.
All right. All right, let's see. I'm gonna see if I can scan. Hester, did you want to add something?
Yeah. As a white person, I'm sort of wondering if we put too much pressure and requirement on artists of color, on artists of gender, on artists of mental development, etc., to be the representative. And now you have to answer for this large group of people that isn't necessarily a coherent community, but is being called the Black community, the LGBTQ community. Those communities are much more varied than that word suggests. And then not somewhat related is, how do you feel about being called a person of color? Cynthia and I were talking yesterday. I find that a problematic way of saying, okay, here we have white people and then the rest. And the rest is so varied and so many different I don't know what the word is, interests and circumstances. And so that is my convoluted question.
Yeah, well, not speaking to the being labeled person of color, but speaking to the idea of I kind of forget the first part of your question, but I think I'm answering it because it came to my mind when you started talking. But having a show like Tammy put together is a great way to show that diversity of opinion, diversity of voice. Because I mean, the 5 artists in the show, even though we're all Black people, the work is so varied, and that speaks to the individual like upbringings that we all have, or individual voices and individual the things that we find interesting, because it's so varied. And I think having more shows like Tammy put together is a way of making that clear to the community at large.
Yeah, I think generally
Yeah,
getting that exposure showing that it's not a monolith. Like any group is very varied in choosing, and as a curator, how you choose the work, that you make sure there's a variety shown, that you're not trying to fit this archetype that this is what you should get if you have a Black show or a trans show or any of that. Making sure that it's diverse, just like the people are, I think really helps.
Zena, did you want to add something?
I guess I had a question about, as the curator of the show, what kind of, do you feel like you have a responsibility to not just showcase like Black artists that are in Oregon, but like to actually network with more local artists in the community? I guess I felt like I was made invisible by that fact, that I didn't necessarily need to be included in this show, but I know 5 other women of color that live in this area that are artists, and they're not represented anywhere. And that, I kind of wonder about galleries and their own responsibility to curate artists that are here.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think just finding artists, connecting with artists, getting artists seen, it's a huge challenge, and networking and getting to know and reaching out and getting opportunities like this one. I was only able to show 5 artists in this venue. And so I reach out, and I do, for me, I just wanted to do my best to show a broad representation of different types and different styles of work, to showcase not just Corvallis, but a broader community, because I feel like that often is the conversations that's needed of seeing more of the breadth of the artists in Oregon. And I hope it's something that I will be able to continue, and other artists will be able to continue to do, as far as being more aware of the artists that are out there in our communities, and have a continuation of opportunities for them to have accessible ways to get their work out there in their community and be seen in their community, but also be seen in the state of Oregon as a whole. And not every artist can be in every show, and that's just kind of, we would love to have every artist in every show, but it just doesn't quite work that way. Short plug for the Chehalem show. Chehalem person, do you want to wave? We will be adding more artists to the show up in Newburgh, and so I'm really looking forward to expanding that. And again, that's just the kind of continuation of trying to do the research and the connections and the community, and getting to know people and finding them and connecting with them out there. Hester, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I just want to say very briefly, Zena, this is not only an issue for artists of color, but for local artists in general. And it was not the mandate that Tammy Jo was asked for to find Corvallis artists, but it was to find artists that were artists of color, and we even defined it as Black or African descent. The Art Center walks a line that is not straight between what we want to show from local people and what we want to show work by artists that our community otherwise might not see. And our educational range requires that. And Zena, I would recommend you participate in what the Art Center does. And there will be shortly an opportunity to submit to the Corinne Woodman Gallery, and then it's a whole different story. But we're trying to do both, and we have 8 shows a year.
I understand that, and I'm not judging what the Art Center has done as a member of the Art Center for the last year or two, it's been fantastic. And I've loved some of the classes I've taken. I just was kind of asking in general because I'm involved with the NAACP, and I get these kind of, oh, so there's going to be lots of local Black artists. And I was like, no. And then I had a few women say, oh, why wasn't I approached? And I was like, I get it. But, so I think that when a show like this happens, people just don't, maybe more communication about that instead of saying Black matters. If there's a group of Black artists here that are traditionally not seen and heard, you don't feel like you matter. And that's hard. So I do understand, being an artist, how hard that can be in general. And I'm honored to be selected for the show. I just wanted to kind of ask that question. How do we
I get it. I
be
get
more
it.
inclusive?
Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
And it's a food for thought.
I mean, I think having this, I mean, having a show like Tammy Jo put together is the start to that conversation and the opportunity for more shows like this to happen. Title in it, Black Matters, is like an invitation to other Black artists in the community to come and do some sort of networking, possibly, to kind of get that conversation started and get more connectivity between the artists. And that connectivity and that, like, it's like Voltron, it's like if you can all get together, you can make something like really powerful. So I think the show that Tammy Jo put together is a start for things to kind of take off in Corvallis. I don't live in the area, but I'd hope that having that show would kind of bolster.
And I think we should see it like that, as a start. This is not the end all of, or a solution of, but it's a start. You got that totally.
Well, we got to also champion Zena just asking the question, the risk of asking the question, the kind of courage it takes to ask the question is also really important as well. Because it's not done. We got to keep doing it.
Yeah. And I would just like to add for future arts organizers, curators, artists, I feel like oftentimes now we're taking things into our own hands when we're not seeing the representation in the galleries and the opportunities. We make those opportunities for ourselves. And I think that's really important to continue to do that. And one of the ways that we can kind of continue to make those opportunities when we're not provided with them. One of the things I did for the show that I think was a really good idea, often there'll be opportunities, it'll be a call for art that requires that you know where to look, how to operate, the online process. You maybe have a fee that you have to pay. You have to be following all of these things. There's a lot of barriers for finding opportunities and having the ability to participate. And so if you are curating a show of underrepresented communities of whatever type, make sure that you find ways to try and eliminate as many of those barriers and do a call, but also make sure to do your research about the local communities. Consider nominations and talk to the people out there that might know artists that could be invited or you could reach out to. Think about new and different ways of connecting and finding artists, because just waiting for them to come to you isn't going to be the best way to really make artists feel welcomed and included and valued in anyway. So I just wanted to add that. So for if you're thinking about shows in the future, and I think it's interesting, and I want to bring this up, and we can see what happens in the future as we wrap up and move into the future. Partway through the show, I noticed that Portland Art Museum put on their website a exhibition of Black artists happening in 2023. So let's see what happens with that. And I looked at the roster of names for that, and I'll be curious to see what their selection process and their presentation of that will be. But I'm intrigued. Hester?
There was something in the chat that you may not have seen. Could you talk a little bit about Christine's gallery, the Ori Gallery, Maya's gallery?
Maya. Yeah, Maya Vivas. She's one of the artists in the exhibition. She did the stoneware pieces. Right there, there we go. Each piece is a different representation of like an internal organ. Maya, let's see, I don't know her official title, but I believe she started the Ori Gallery, which is located in Portland, Oregon. I don't, is Brett or Maya here? Are they with us? Did anyone notice? Anyway, but I know that gallery specifically is working towards representing underrepresented communities, I believe, artists of color, queer, trans artists as well. Great space. You should definitely check it out. What was the other, was there other stuff in the chat? Sorry, I'm trying to scan. Can we talk a little about Christie's work? Are you talking about Christy, the other artist that
No,
wasn't here?
this is the question that I just asked you.
She meant Maya's
just
gallery,
about
not
Maya's
Christine.
gallery. Okay. Yeah, and Maya is also, let's see, I don't know what's currently on view at her gallery, but Ori Gallery is ORI. You're all welcome to check it out.
And I just put a link to a show that Christine put on last year at Blackfish. That was amazing. It was Black Power is a Color. So there's a link in the chat. You can check out the work that was in that show. She did a really good, great job with it.
All right, is there anything else that we missed that we should cover before we wrap up? Any other opportunities, happenings, things people want to share?
Just to put in a plug for the reception, closing reception again.
And that will be June 19th from 3 to 5 p.m. at the Corvallis Arts Center. And I know I will be there. I don't know about the other artists. This is kind of a new happening, so we haven't had a chance to talk about who will be there live in person, but hopefully if many of us that can be will be there. And if you would like to see an extension of this show, you can visit us again in Chehalem Cultural Center in June and July, where additional artists will be added, and a new work by Moa will be on view, since his pieces are site specific. So there'll be a brand new painting installation there to check out for sure. And I think the sun's gonna come out, so we should probably all continue on with our day.
I like the last question in the chat by Chehalem Cultural Center.
Let's see. Oh, I'm reading it now. They're asking the artists if
I can ask it better, probably in words.
Sure, go for it.
Is this the first show you've been in that's all Black artists? Is that something that happens frequently, or is this new? I mean, just curious.
I don't think I've intentionally been in a show of all Black artists in the past. I think I've just incidentally, just in the community that I've come from, have been in shows with all Black artists, but not specifically targeted towards that, like this one is.
I think this is probably my second show that's been exhibited of all Black artists. But it's not common. I tend to be in more groups where it's either photography or female centric or something like that. So yeah.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
Well, I just do a lot of music stuff and performance stuff and things like, so I don't even think half the time folks know that I do art, or that it's just, it'll be like in one pocket, you know, like folks. So doing shows is not even in general necessarily something that's all that common for me, quite frankly. And to answer your question more specifically, I think this is one of the first in the, I think this was the first for me. I think.
The Art Center, this is the first time the Art Center has done a show with Black artists. Oh, No, it's not actually. We used to have a show called the Martin Luther King Show, where it was mostly Black artists, but it had to be art that was dealing with Black people. But we've done more exhibits specifically to a particular group. We've done Native American, we've done women, we've done people in prison, we've done people generally called mentally disabled, or I don't know what the right term for that is. So the Art Center has a little bit of a history of trying to reach groups of artists that have lesser chance if they're not called Johnson. Mr. Johnson, to be exact.
That just made me think of vaccines. That's all that made me think of.
All right, do we have any final thoughts, questions, things people want to share? That was some good ones, so I want to make sure we're not missing any more good ones.
That's a good one.
All right, let's see. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Hester, do you see anything?
No. It's people thanking you for a rich conversation, and the artist, of course. And I'd like to say again that the reception on an unusual day for us, Saturday, June 19th from 3 to 4. Part of it, I'm sure, will be outside so that we don't have to crowd inside. We decided on this yesterday, so the fact that you haven't heard about it before makes sense. But thank you, Tammy and Owen, to suggest this to me at a certain point when you were setting up. At that time, I thought, oh, we're never going to be there. But look at me now, no mask.